When it comes to the S3 security, there's a new feature that you need to know about, which is the S3 access points. So it's a way for you to define a access point whichever have its own DNS and its own policy, and you can limit who can access that specific access points. So it could be a specific IAM user or group, and you have one policy per access point. So the idea is that instead of having a very complex bucket policy to manage, it's going to be central with many different lines. So you can create many access points for your S3 buckets, and then each access point will have its own policy. So the idea is that you can restrict traffic from a specific VPC, as we'll see in the next slide, and then access points are linked to a specific bucket. So they get a unique name per account and reason. So let's do an example. So we have an S3 bucket, and we have the finance data and the sales data, and we just have a very simple bucket policy because we are going to use the access points. And now say we have three groups who want to access our S3 buckets. We have different access rules, of course. So we have the finance group, the sales group, and the analytics groups. So we are going to create a finance access point, and this access point, of course, will only be authorized to access the finance data, and a sales point of access the sales data. Sales access point would access the sales data, and the analytics access point would access both the finance and the sales data. And so now the finance access point can have its own access policy, and this policy will grant read or write access to the finance prefix of the finance user group. Same for the sales access account. So it will have its own policy to grant read or write access to the sales prefix, where the analytics access point will have its own policy to grant read access to all the bucket. Okay, so to both the finance and the sales data, but only read access. Okay, this will be only used by the analytics team. So we can see here we have a way to manage some very complex security group rules at the access point level, instead of managing it all within a simple big complex bucket policy. Okay, so when we have a shared bucket and want to be accessed only from a specific VPC, and how it's going to work, how would it work? So we have S3 buckets and we have EC2 instances in all different VPC who want to access the S3 buckets privately with access points. So what's the architecture is going to be for this? So we create the VPC access points, and then this access point will have an access point policy, and seeing that the only way for it to be accessed is by having S3 access point network origin to be VPC. So here we are restricting access from VPC only, and because we are doing cross accounts, we have to create and that's the trick that you have to know in the exam. You have to create a VPC gateway endpoint, and this endpoint will have its own endpoint policy to allow the EC2 instances to access it. And then the gateway endpoint is going to be linked to the VPC access point and then linked to the S3 bucket, and this is how you would access it from a different VPC. So this is the same architecture for VPC B. So we have a VPC gateway endpoint and the endpoint policy, and then it will access the VPC access point, and so on for the VPC C and the VPC D. So the trick here, remember that in each account that will have an access to the central VPC access point, you will need to have a VPC gateway endpoint. So that's it for this S3 access point section. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next lecture.